Good evening now, nearly. We started off with good morning and we're now into good evening. So it's been the most fantastic day and I'm delighted to say that it's not quite over yet. We are in the final part of Gender Day, which is we're going to hear in a minute from Miriam Gonzalez-Durantez, who again, I'm sure is one of those people who needs very little, if any, introduction to most of you. Miriam is a lawyer, has had huge experience serving in the European Union on international EU trade law and policy, but most recently is the founder of the Inspiring Women campaign, which is a particularly fitting end to a day which has been full of inspiring women. This is a campaign to bring women together with girls in state schools to talk about their jobs and the route they took to where they are today. We've heard a lot over the course of the day about the importance of role models, changing social norms, raising expectations, and here is a really fantastic example of that in practice. In just 3 years since it was launched, the campaign's involved over 20,000 women going in to talk to 300,000 UK secondary school girls. There is another mum here from my daughter's class at school, so I hope that we can call on your services, Miriam, to come into that school very soon. Now, and Miriam is here to talk about that and also to talk about the next stage of the campaign, which I'm delighted to say is going to be internationalising and taking that campaign and that idea to organising meetups for women and girls internationally. So Miriam is going to talk for 10-15 minutes, and then there'll be a chance to ask her some questions before we go back to continue the conversations informally. Over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you, and thank you for staying also. I mean, you have to be one of the most disciplined audiences that you have gone for a drink and come back to hear yet another speech. I'm the kind of woman who until very recently thought that all this International Women's Day was a bit nonsense, really. That it belittled us, that we kind of, why do we really need an International Women's Day? Sure that at this point, every single day should be International Women's Day and we don't need special event to celebrate it. But then came 2011, which was the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. And I remember that I went to my kids' school just to leave them there, and I asked one of the mom friends of mine casually, do you know what day is it today? And it was obviously the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. But her answer was Baking Day. So I ended up having to bake on the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. And I think that ever since then, I think, boy, we do need these kind of occasions so that we remind ourselves of all the progress that we still need to achieve. One of them being, obviously, that whenever we are being told that there is Baking Day, we should pass those orders to our husbands and partners. It is easy to forget sometimes that we live in a country which is one of the best places for women to live. And, if you look backwards, 20th century, and I can probably say that confidently because I am not British, but this country has contributed probably most than any other to progress on gender rights. The vote, the equal pay, and you keep on counting. So sometimes when we look at things from our country, or let me rephrase that for those of you who may read the Daily Mail, when you look at things from your country and my country of adoption, you may be thinking that things look good. But if it's only, you get into an airplane from any of the airports here and you travel, 4 or 5 hours south, generally south, there are lots and lots of women whose rights are abused almost on a daily basis. And those are not abuses of gender rights. Those are abuses of human rights. In a way, it's almost worse now, because you do not really need to get into an airplane. You can just get into the Eurostar, and you just cross 2 hours, and there in Calais, there are lots of women whose rights are being abused on a daily basis. So there is a lot of progress to be done, there, but also here. And the reason it is important for women who are seeing those enormous amounts of abuses of their gender rights, the reason why it is important for them that you go on doing what we need to do here in the UK to get complete parity is because they need hope. They need to be able to know that in some countries we can go all the way. And that we are not just going to be happy, yes, okay, well, we are comfortable, but, there are little bits and pieces that really bother us, and they don't really consider us completely equal. But, we can live with it because we have gone through the critical threshold. No, these women and girls in particular need to know that we have really delivered to them so that we can be the role model for the progress that they need to get pretty much everywhere throughout the world. I come from the foreign affairs world. Before I was a lawyer, I spent many years in the European Commission, and I was working first as a trade negotiator and then as a Middle East specialist. So I was the person who worked in the office of the various commissioners, and whenever they went there to meet the ministers and so on, I was there taking diligently the notes. Something that always shocked me, and my bosses were both men and women, is that whenever we were going to all these meetings, you always had the brief for the commissioner, for the minister, and you had, typically trade. You always start with trade, and then you talk about the politics, the general political developments, about their neighborhood or so on. And then you talk about the cooperation programs, and then you talk about human rights, kind of, like, would you mind, Minister, if I mention human rights? And only right at the end, or very often not at all, there could be gender rights. And I was dealing with countries where, the abuses of human rights that women suffer were forefront as to what was happening in these societies. Now, I think back about why is that? Why is it that in politics nowadays, international politics, we are not talking about these abuses constantly? It is not because the ministers are terrible people, or it is not because there is a conspiracy against women. I think that part of the reason why this is happening is that the abuses of rights of women are so normal. They have happened for so long. They happen in so many cases that sometimes we do not even appreciate them in their whole horror and brutality. Let me give you a few examples about things that could be said about women. Let's imagine that this was happening in one country. That Catholics, I'm a Catholic, so I can say that happily, that Catholics could be condemned by law to stoning if they were being raped by non-Catholics. What do you think that the world would be making of this? Black ethnic minorities deny the right of education. I am on record saying that not enough is being done on racial discrimination. Much more needs to be done. But what do you think that would happen if that was something that was happening to a country? What would happen if this was the case in a country? I tell you what would happen. We would be in the United Nations every single day with demonstrations, with committees, every single meeting that would happen between the politicians of these countries and our politicians. We would be raising it. The social community, the NGOs, we would all be up in arms just saying that this is just not on. Instead, we allow it to happen. We all allow it to happen. And part of my point as to what needs to happen here and internationally is that we need to wake up to the discriminations. And for understanding the discriminations, sometimes you need to put what is happening to women in the context of any other group, whether it's a race group, whether it's a religious group, any other group. And then you will understand the full horror of it. This is what happens. I know that you have been talking for a long time about chores and women and where do we spend a lot of our time, and you have gone through these statistics. But this is what is happening, as many of you know, in a lot of places in the developing world. 125 million hours a day. It's just almost shocking when you try to put that together. I went a few years ago with not Inspiring Women, but a different project that I handle with The Circle, that if you have not heard about The Circle, it is a really, really good kind of umbrella organization set up here in the UK by Annie Lennox. And we were doing a project on the implementation of the Maputo Protocol on gender rights, that if some of you haven't looked at it, I really recommend it. It's the kind of, you know, from right to dignity to right to education. It's the kind of book. I have 3 sons, but if I had girls, I would put that by their bedside table so they look at it every day. And it's a great piece of legislation agreed by African countries themselves, but obviously the issue is the implementation of those rights. So we went to Tanzania to see how things were happening on the ground. And they were telling us that by the age of 12, many of the girls who were doing really well in school, they started doing badly, and eventually many of them left education altogether. The answer to that is this. The answer to that is that by the age of 12, those girls start becoming responsible for fetching the water, which implies going there with 40 kilos packet, backwards and forwards quite a few times. And obviously, when they arrive in school, they arrive exhausted. It is much more difficult to compete in school when you are tired with boys who have not had to do this. It's a pretty simple and straightforward answer. Well, if you look at what happens in the developed world, obviously the situation is different. We don't have women having to fetch the water, but at the end of the day, we are still responsible for many of the chores that go on in the house. And I'm not going to test you on how many of you thought that these were the hands of a woman simply because those were pinky gloves. In my view, what has happened is that women have got the equality before the law. That is the very first thing that we got. Then we got the equality at work, that obviously there are still bits and pieces, but you know, it's kind of there as a right. We are getting the equality in terms of taking care of the children, is where I think that society is moving. But the bit that is still missing is the equality at home. And there is part of us, I think, that feel uncomfortable with this discussion. The reason we feel uncomfortable with this discussion is that it looks like whinging. There is no selling point. There is no selling point. I can sell the care of the children, and I can confidently say to any single man, if you don't do that, you miss a lot, and you will regret it in your life. I cannot say to any man that they are going to miss not ironing, because there is nothing nice in irony. I also think that we don't make any favors to each other or to the girls by hiding this issue. The issue of care is the biggest debate that we have in our society now for women. There are many other things that we need to sort out, but it's the single biggest issue that we have there on the table. And many of us who work hide the fact that we have help. We really need to expose it all out. We need to have a completely open debate. Otherwise, we are doing a disservice to the next generation. Now, you have read some of the things that could be seen in the context of other groups in relation to developing countries. But what happens here? What happens in our country? I have highlighted a few headlines that I have found in different publications, and just see what you think of this. This is something that was published. I know you think that this is the Daily Mail. And it was the Daily Mail. This one was the Daily Mail. Working mothers, we are the origin of all the problems. The kids do worse at school. They suffer mental stress. Eventually, I think that they were blaming us for unemployment. Men have been doing this for centuries. And apparently working fathers are not a problem for this. Professional women are the new drinkers. This was another headline. This one was not the Daily Mail. If you read it, certainly all of you in this category. And something completely shocking. 2/5 of Britons, and I could put there any other European nationality, believe that there are some jobs that we should never do. Surgeon, why do people think that we cannot be surgeons? Well, translate it. As I told you earlier, translate it. What would you think of that? Do you think that anybody would publish that? Well, perhaps they could, some newspapers. Do you really think that anybody would have the guts to publish something like this, any single editor, without being fired? You know, and again, I'm not saying that we should not do more on any discrimination, whether it's religious, whether it's racial, but we accept things in relation to women that we do not accept in relation to any other group. And to me, because I'm 47, though you should not believe that I'm 47, and I'm really disappointed that you are not looking like really. But to me, this is nothing. You know, I have gone through situations where not only I have read all this, but I have read, you know, terrible things being said about myself. You know, I was identified very much as the professional woman in 2010, simply because I said that I was going to help my husband in the political campaign, but I was not going to follow him like a flower pot, basically, to decorate him, summarizing. And ever since then, two things happened to me. One is that I'm invited to pretty much every single women-related event in London. And second, that I was identified like, you know, professional woman. That label, boom, came to me. Little did I know that that would come with lots of other different labels. So normally that comes with you are aggressive, you are a ball breaker, you know, you wear the trousers, that's a good one. You are not a very good wife, really, you are not dedicated there. And eventually you are not a very good mother. And I have had situations, for example, where I have gone with Nick on something that I feel very strongly about. I cook a lot. I run a food blog with my kids, Mom and Sons, and actually I will be publishing a cooking book shortly, which is one of the weird things that I do. But I feel very strongly about the school lunches. So I was going with Nick to one school to take some pictures about the school lunches policy that he was very much behind. I just could not imagine the headlines. It was like, you know, this woman who obviously is not scared to be is not used to being in the schools, and therefore was scary to children. You think, you know, this is unbelievable, the kind of way in which people can look at something like this. And I know that, you know, it is easy to blame media, but media is a reflection of society. So at the end of the day, what is happening is that women are still seen through labels. But you apply that to me, as I was saying earlier, I don't care. Whether this is general or specific, I don't care. You know, it goes through my head. Put this in the context of the girls, and I do care. Because what to me and to you may be background noise, it is the background against which the girls are being brought up. And this is shaping their aspirations, and this is shaping their dreams. And it just cannot be that women like you and I, who have so much, we owe so much to the previous generations, it cannot be that all of you and the men as well, we don't do what is needed, not for the final bit, it's the final bit, we are almost there. We don't need to die, we don't need to go to prison, we don't need to tie ourselves to Westminster or whatever, we just need to speak up. The bits that we do is inspiring women, which is about bringing role models to schools. I hope that you have all registered. If you haven't, please Google us, because it's a simple thing. We only ask 1 hour per year, and sure, you can do 1 hour. I'm dedicating to you 1 hour per year. But find whatever it is. If for you it is not the going to school to talk to the girls, find your area. What is important is that everybody makes a commitment. It could be for you mentoring. It could be, you know, it doesn't even need to be an organized campaign. It can be about the girls or the women that you work with that may need some help. Find your area. But only until we all find our little square centimeters, you know, we put them all together and we could make millions of square kilometers. I am absolutely optimistic. I think that parity is something that we will achieve. It's only when we are going to achieve it. I don't want this to be in 100 years' time. I want to see it. I want my children to see it. You know, I want to be the mother of 3 sons who lived through parity, and I think that we owe it to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miriam. Fantastic speech, and I think great to come back at the end of the day to what we can do, not just in our professional lives, which is what brings many of us here, but also in our personal lives. And remembering that this is something that we live every day, as well as something that we study and that we do advocacy on, and which is part of our jobs. So thank you, a fantastic reminder. We've got time for a few questions. I'm sure that everybody is getting a little bit weary at the end of the day, but I certainly don't want to deny you the opportunity to put your point across or ask Miriam anything that's on your mind. So let me just take one round of questions and we'll see how we go. Ishbel.
Hi, I'm Ishbel Matheson from ODI. You were talking about inspiring women. Hillary Clinton may be the next president of the United States. What difference do you think that might make?
Great question.
I think a massive difference. I should declare my interest here. I'm a Hillary Clinton supporter. And I'm not just a Hillary Clinton supporter because she is a woman. I have seen her in action, and I'm a Hillary Clinton supporter regardless of her gender. But in addition, I think that having a woman as a president is a massively powerful symbol. And I think that part of what the girls need to see, listen, I realize that this is not only about powerful women, right? We in our campaign, for example, we make the point constantly of not just putting there the well-known faces or the people who have made it to CEOs. This is not the game. The game is about exposing all the various opportunities, all the various things that women have done, the high level, the low level, the old, the young, whatever it is. But there is something to be said for girls and boys getting used to the fact of seeing power and women together. And if there is something that is a powerful symbol there, at least for the time being, is the presidency of the United States.
Thank you. Any more questions? Over here.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I work for Street Child. You talked a bit about labels and the press's attitude towards you. How do you think that the Twitter generation and this, which is reported in the news this week, that people think that abuse of women on Twitter is going to become a new norm, a new social norm, because we don't have enough of those. How do you think that we need to adjust our thinking about gender to reflect social media and the online presence and dangers that girls face?
The answer to that, honestly, is that I don't know. It's one of my biggest worries. But I don't think that I understand it sufficiently well, and I think that we generally, as a society, do not understand it sufficiently well. There is, when we talk to the girls in our campaign, is 13, 14 years old. And you can see immediately the generational gap. For them, virtual and real, I step in and out. They don't see the difference. This is all completely seamless to them. But you can see in some of the conversations that they feel coerced and pushed in different directions through the pressure of social media. I think that there is an easy angle to understand there that for me is that it pushes the whole world becomes visual, which is the area where the girls have an issue. About being seen always and taking care of the image. So obviously that amplifies what is already a big concern. But the other side of it, which is the abuse that could happen, I'm a mother of 3 sons, one of them in adolescence. It can happen to both genders. But it seems to be happening more to girls than to boys. And I honestly don't think that we have had a sufficiently knowledgeable and candid discussion as to what needs to be done, and actually whether something needs to be done or we just need to live with it and work on their personal responsibility? And I'm not sure, really, is the answer, which is very unsatisfactory, I know.
Thank you. Okay, Carolyn, you get the last word.
Carolyn Williams from Institute for Global Prosperity at UCL. Thank you very much. I was just thinking that we've spent a lot of time thinking about gender equality, and we're within the framework now of the new 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the aim is sustainable, sustained, and shared prosperity. We've talked a lot about sharing and equality, but how do we connect the empowerment of women, women's agency, gender equality with promoting biodiversity, renewable energies, reducing carbon emissions, making the planet sustainable? Have you any kind of experience or ideas about how women can lead on renewables? It seems to be a very scientific, very technological, male-dominated world. But how on earth can we get women as leaders of the sustainable development approach?
Two answers to that. One of them is that I think that in terms of leadership, part of the issue happens much earlier on. We have an issue with women and technology altogether. And we see with the girls, 13, 14, 13, 14 is nothing, huh? But we already see issues about, maths is not really for girls, physics definitely not. And I don't know whether this is just, something I'm not really sure about is whether this is just lack of self-confidence, or whether there is a lack of self-confidence with something else, which is that we like predictability. I like predictability. I like to know that if I put an effort on something, I see the result. A lot of the maths is about trial and error, and you need to have that confidence. It probably comes back to the confidence of making the mistake, so that you come back to trying through a different route. There may be a combination there which is not as simple as simply saying, this is a lack of self-esteem. But definitely we are losing, we are creating a technical gap very early on, which is what you need later on. I mean, if you look at where the discussion around the world is now, and some of you know much more than me about it, but clearly the gap is going to be those who know maths, those who don't. And maths in the real sense, maths in the programming, in the abstract sense. It's not calculus. That's where we are going wrong with the education system. We are not getting enough girls there, so we are going to see more and more of a gap. I have to say, though, that though I think that I agree with the sentiment of your question, I have generally been quite critical at the mainstreaming gender into everything else. So they're looking at the gender through what we are doing on environment, it has a gender dimension. What we are doing on energy policy has a gender dimension. What we are doing on whatever it is, the startups, which is the biggest thing, we have a gender. Yes, that is true. But while the situation is still what it is, we also need a standalone gender dimension, because otherwise it's a manner to hide the issue. I don't want any hiding, whether it's on the development work, whether it is about the education work that we need to do here. And I believe that you should do all that, but you should continue looking at gender discrimination on its own until we eradicate it. And hopefully we can look at it in a mainstream fashion.
Thank you so much, Miriam. What a fantastic way to end the day. Really, really inspiring. Great talk and really interesting discussion to follow. Before I let everybody out of here, there are, two more things I want to say. First of all, just a huge thank you to everybody who's been here through the day, all the speakers, all the chairs, all of you for asking questions, for participating, for keeping going through the day. But secondly, of course, you can imagine the enormous efforts that it's taken to put this together. There's been a huge team at ODI who have been involved in this, who've been doing that. We sit in the same part of the building, so I've been watching day to day the enormous efforts that have been going into this. As I say, it's a huge team, but there are two people in particular I'd like to recognise. So Rebecca and Hannah, I think you need to stand up and take a round of applause. And thank you again to Miriam. Thank you to all of you. And please continue the discussion outside.